Celebration was launched in a national event on the Canada on 31st October 2023. The country is united behind the theme One People, One Journey, One Future. The present show celebration was launched in a national event on the Canada on 31st October 2023. The country is united behind the theme One People, One Journey, One Future.
an oath of allegiance. Yes, Grenada does say the Her Majesty the Queen, and unless the context otherwise requires, and then it goes through and it describes what that oath is. But that's not the same in the Bahamas Constitution. I did a little reading here. Section 37, the Bahamas, section 121 in Dominica, St. Lucia, and they're all here. I have to pull them up one by one, but I hope you will take my word for it. St. Lucia, section 124.1, St. Vincent, section 105.1, Dominica, 121.1. Here's what they all say, and I could just pull up one of them because they all use the same language. They say, because there is no form as to the oath of allegiance, they leave it to be prescribed by law. That's what they say explicitly. It has to be prescribed by law. And like everything else in the law, we have to go to another section to know what that means. What does that mean? To be prescribed by law. Bahamas says any instrument having the force of law. It doesn't explicitly say, the Constitution of Bahamas, for example, does not explicitly say what that instrument is. It says any instrument having the force of law. I think our friends in the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, it is explicit. It has to be an act of parliament to change the oath of allegiance. And it's actually defined in 49.1, I believe, of that constitution. But when you look at our Westminster Constitution, they say it has to be prescribed by law, and it's explicit. I mentioned Bahamas, Dominica, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent. And what does prescribed by law mean? Any instrument having the force of law. Any instrument. So it could be a regulation, an SRO, an act of parliament. That's what I read any to mean. Any instrument having the force of law.
But Brother Jerry, if I may ask, you don't think we need to proceed from first of all, what our text says?
Well, let's go to Grenada, yes.
Yes, because I just want to, I understand what you say, but I just want to ask this question. As you say, our Constitution defines oath of allegiance. Yes,
in the interpretation clause, Schedule 3, it says, yes.
And it does say that the oath of allegiance is set out in Schedule 3.
Yes.
That.
Let's say what it says. The oath of allegiance, it has a form in Grenada.
It has a form.
Yes, I blank do swear or affirm that I will faithfully bear true allegiance, etc., etc.
Right. And I think that we all agree, there's no debate on it, that Schedule 3 is not a DP entrance section of the Constitution.
We could agree with that, absolutely.
Right. So there's no debate on that. I think
there's no debate. It's not.
As I understand it, it's the trust of Dr. Alexis's position. Right? However, Schedule 1 of the Constitution, which is the schedule that outlines the sections of the Constitution which requires referendum approval. It's the Schedule 1 contains those sections which require referendum approval.
It says, yes, it says section 19, 21, 57,
and it goes on.
And it goes on. Yes.
Section 111, and remember section 111 is the section of the Constitution that defines the oath. So it says section 111 in its application to any of the provisions mentioned in the foregoing items of this schedule. So I'm saying that my position, I'm asking you, I understand Dr. Alexis's position to be that, listen, Schedule 3, the oath, was explicitly and deliberately not included under Schedule 1.
Right.
No dispute about that.
Correct.
However, Section 111, which contains the oath, is included not in full, but in qualifying terms, in that it says that it applies to any of the provisions mentioned in the foregoing items of this schedule. So it doesn't apply across the board. It only applies if it relates to one of the provisions under Schedule 1. So I think that you will have to get around the argument that by virtue of the Constitution itself provided that section 111, which includes the oaths, in its application to any of the provisions mentioned in the foregoing items of this schedule, that a referendum is required if it is to be amended, to be altered. You have to get around that argument to say that, well, this is an exception.
Well, it says 111, that's the interpretation clause now. It says, in this Constitution, unless, and I think these are the important words, unless the context otherwise required.
Right.
Which is the question.
Right.
The context of the oath of allegiance, because it enumerates that. It enumerates that.
Yes.
What is the context that would abrogate bringing the oath of allegiance into the entrenched category? That's how I read it.
Right.
I don't mean I mean the deeply entrenched category.
Right. So I'm saying that you have to be arguing that despite section 111 of the Constitution being included in a qualified manner in Schedule 1, you have to say that you have to be arguing that the words, unless the context otherwise required, takes it out of it.
Yeah. And I think that is where we apply a systems analysis.
Right.
It says, how do we find the context? Well, let us look at other Westminster constitutions and how they treat with the oath of allegiance. How did they treat with it? Because we don't want to be in a box all by ourselves thinking that this constitution we have is so unique. I mean, after all, constitutions do what? They regulate the conduct of the state always to its citizens, right?
Right. But if I take you up on what you say, right? If I take you up on that, in other words, you can argue that, listen, Schedule 1 is very specific, and Schedule 3 is very specific, and it is deliberately left out. Yeah?
Yeah.
And therefore, when you read
natural meaning.
Yes. So therefore, when you read Schedule 1, saying that section 111 in its application to any of the provisions mentioned in the foregoing items of this schedule, you have to read it to say, that's what I understand you to be saying, that you have to read it to say that the context in which the term oath is being used takes it out of those words, under Schedule 111.
That's the point. That's the position. I understand it, and I think one can be, and can I say must be on all fours with Dr. Alexis's position.
Right.
Yes?
So my position is this there. That's an argument that one can mount. Right? However, what that says to me is that the contention that it is straightforward, that it is simple and straightforward with regard to those two sections is problematic.
Yes. Well,
Problematic in what way? Well, let's get to the problem. What do you see as the problem?
No, because all I see as the problem, and let me make it absolutely and abundantly clear, all for abolishing that voting.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm with you.
All for-
Yes,
in
of course.
fact-
Of course.
In fact, from the earlier piece, you will see I am in fact saying that I believe we can go much further. Not advocating that we rush going further, but I believe we can go much further with regard to the issue of reforming the Constitution.
Yes.
So I'm all for it, but all I'm saying is that we have to get around, we have to have an argument getting around the inclusion of Section 111 in Schedule 1 of the Constitution in order to arrive at a place where we say that notwithstanding the use of the term oaths in a deeply entrenched clause, it is not captured within the meaning of the words Section 111 in its application to any provision mentioned in the foregoing items of the schedule. In other words, we will have to be reading an exception into that clause in the schedule to arrive at the place where I think we all want to arrive.
Yes.
Sorry,
Yes. Well, let's just look at it and probably strip it apart for the benefit of listeners and viewers. The underlying basis for Dr. Alexis's position is that Schedule 3 is excluded from deeply entrenched provisions. And how we know it's a deeply entrenched provision is that you refer back to 39.5 of the Constitution, because 39.5 of the Constitution is where provisions are made for a referendum to be held for the purpose of altering particular sections of the Constitution. And so we see two sections, and let's look at the realistic result. So on the one hand, Dr. Alexis is saying, listen, it's straightforward because Schedule 1, which is the schedule that says which parts of the Constitution are deeply entrenched, does not include Schedule 3. On the other hand, Section 111 of the Constitution, which contains the definition clause, refers, yes, to Schedule 3. And at the same time, the oath of allegiance to be taken by the supervisor of elections and the members of the Public Service Commission, those are deeply entrenched provisions and are subject to Section 39.5 for change. Now the question is, can we handpick and remove oaths of allegiance from those sections, even though those sections are specific and deeply entrenched? So, for example, Section 35 of the Constitution, if I might just get it quickly here, it says there shall be a supervisor of elections whose duty it shall be to exercise general supervision over the registration of voters in elections of the members of the House of Representatives and over the conduct of such elections. And then it goes on to say that 35.1, 35.3 says, a person shall not enter upon the duties of the office of taking and subscribe to the, so using that as an example, the oath of allegiance is in Schedule 3 of the Constitution. And the definition section says the oath of allegiance is what it says it is in Section 3, in Schedule 3 of the Constitution. So let's just take it a bit further. So Dr. Alexis is basically arguing, as I understand it, that an oath of allegiance is an oath of allegiance. The focus is on taking the oath and not necessarily the form of the oath. That is what I understand his argument. The other argument presented by Mr. Lane is that, listen, the very Constitution says that 35.3 is a deeply entrenched provision. And if it says oath of allegiance, section 111 says oath of allegiance means the oath in Schedule 3. However, because, and I think that's where the interpretation of Constitution come into play, because unlike ordinary laws passed by Parliament, which are, strictly interpreted, a Constitution is more generously interpreted, as the saying goes, to give effect to the plenitude of rights provided under the Constitution. So what approach a court will likely take in interpreting these sections? In my view, those sections would not be treated in isolation, because what it can lead to is an absurdity. And here where the absurdity goes. There's general agreement that Section 20, which creates the office of the Governor General, is not a deeply entrenched section. And section, you have the Prime Minister taking the oath of allegiance, not also a deeply entrenched provision. So here, if we go forward with the Alexis proposal on the basis of that, listen, we have certain sections of the Constitution that are not deeply entrenched and therefore do not require a referendum, so we can change those. What will happen is this. The members of Parliament take an oath of allegiance to Grenada. The Governor
I hear you. I know where you're going with this.
State takes an oath of allegiance to Grenada. The Prime Minister takes an oath of allegiance. In that context,
to the Queen,
could we have a situation where the Governor General and the supervisor take a different oath? One takes it to Grenada, takes it to Her Majesty the Queen or King Charles, and same with the Public Service Commission. Is there something that is so characteristically unique about the supervisor of elections and the members of the PSC that that we can say, listen, they have to take a different oath? It would not be clean at all, And in those circumstances, given the kind of generous interpretation, Grenada being an independent state for 50 years, freed from the United Kingdom, the former colonial power, I believe if a court had to look at it, it would be minded to, and this is where I think Mr. Lane position comes in, that yes, when you look at it, correct. But what would it lead to if you have some pledging allegiance to Grenada and others pledging to King Charles? And in my respectful view, yes, but the other aspect of it, though, which is the aspect I believe that needs this aspect, of course, needs to be thoroughly and robustly debated. But the aspect of the Supreme Law Clause, Section 105, not being deeply entrenched. And I get it that what you're saying is that this is not deeply entrenched, so we could use that route to say, listen, Section 35 and 83, a special act of parliament, say that they would no longer be subject to the deeply entrenched provisions, if I understand you correctly. But it's just the interpretation. So are we saying basically, if we go to Dr. Alexis' model, and Dr. Alexis wants that model in place for February 7th, which is just a little over a week from now. And he's saying we can call Parliament together and get a special 2/3 majority. Mr. Lane is that, listen, yes, you can do that, but only for the Governor General, the Prime Minister, the parliamentarians, but not for the Supervisor of Elections and the members of the Public Service Commission. And I suppose the question can be asked, why not? Who will oppose it? One, will anybody really oppose it? 50 years after independence, and I'm asking a rhetorical question here, because it was some anomaly, quite frankly.
I think, Brother Ruggles, that we sometimes we lawyers speak to other lawyers, and we use language. Sometimes we forget that the public, the lay public, to coin Celia Klein's often used phrase, Celia Klein of blessed memory. She says, we must always remember when we are discussing the law outside the courts and outside of our office and our conversations with each other, that we have to use lay language. A constitution has some 4 aspects. And here I want to deal with Section 35. There are 4, the entrails, the guts, the belly of a constitution. What for the purposes of this conversation, we might call it entrenched, deeply entrenched provisions. Those having to do with liberty, life, due process, and the right to vote. These are deep democratic principles that are enshrined in a constitution. We can extract, that is, Section 35 deals with the function of voting and the responsibility of the officers charged with carrying out the vote, like Section 83, the machinery of government, how that should operate. That oath, I would argue, to understand what it means, I think by reference we must look at the other Westminster Constitution. That's why the precedential value. When section schedule 3, schedule 1 says, unless the context otherwise provide. What is that context? I would suggest that context takes us outside of core principles of a constitution. Think of the Jamaica case. When Jamaica wanted to go to remove the Privy Council as its final court and go to the CCJ. The Privy Council said that's fine, you could do that. But the courts, the courts themselves are such a core, this rule of law is such a core aspect of a constitution that is more than just Parliament voted. Let's contrast that with that Trinidad case that had to do with the removal. And here I think maybe Section 35 might be, just have that in the back of our heads. Trinidad wants, the Parliament of Trinidad once passed a law that says, if someone crosses the floor, kick them out of Parliament. Yeah, kick them out of Parliament. And the Privy Council says, but that's not a court. It's like bankruptcy. You remember the Trinidad Constitution says, if you are bankrupt, you cannot serve as a parliamentarian. Well, the Parliament of Trinidad seized on that and say, let's go under that section and say if a parliamentarian crosses the floor, we can get him out. Privy Council say, whoa, no. This is not some core aspect of a constitution. It's not a core aspect. I think that voting, and so Section 35 speaks to the supervisor of election taking an oath. But the supervisor of election is involved in something that is core to a constitution. That is the right in a democratic society to vote. They must take an oath of allegiance. What is that oath of allegiance they must take? Well, what do our other Westminster constitutions say? They say that, it could be an act of parliament. It's any act, any law under the act, as Trinidad says, or as the Bahamas says, any provision.
Well, see, Jerry, our constitution is differently worded, eh? So we can't necessarily just apply it across the board. For example, Trinidad Constitution, I don't think they have any provisions for referendum. They have, I think, a Schedule 3/5 majority.
Yes.
So
let's look at St. Lucia or Dominica or St. Vincent or the Bahamas.
However, we have to look at the Constitution itself, because we can't necessarily say Dominica Constitution has it, so we can have it. We can aspire to reach there. St. Lucia, for example, both Dominica and St. Lucia, remember, they don't have any they didn't have any provisions for referendum to go to the CCJ. So they are both there. Because it's differently, while there are similarities and essentially the same in many material respects, but there are differences, and we have to also accept that the Grenada Constitution has certain fundamental differences that no other constitution has. Our 84-8, for example, under the Public Service Commission, that provision for pensions in the context of reorganization. I don't think any other constitution in the region had that provision. It came out of Grenada's peculiar history. And
But our
so
oath of allegiance,
consideration.
but our oath of allegiance is not peculiar to our constitution.
Okay, we have a question in the chat, but before I take the question,
Yes.
I just say we don't have the radio with us today, so I think we have a little leeway to go on for a short bit. But before I even say that, I want to just make 2 points. I think all the discussion, and in particular, Robert, you highlighted the issue of Section 111 and 83 as it impacts 83 and 35 and 83 of the Constitution, and as against Schedule 3. I think what that highlights, A, is that the issue is, in particular with regard to those 2 sections, the issue is not as straightforward as it is made out. And I think
But I thought we agreed that the oath, we have some baseline agreement that the oath, whether it's in one Schedule 3, is not entrenched. Is not deeply entrenched. We can agree that the powers are in the parliament, the lower and the upper house.
That's really different. That's really different in terms of argumentation, at least. Because I'm saying that 83 and 35 can be read as, when you see oath there, you can read it as incorporated the words in Schedule 1. That's point number 1. Point number 2, I think you can equally argue that the reason why the oath in Schedule 3 is not deeply entrenched is because the framers of the Constitution deliberately did not want to extend it across the board. At least analytically, you can arrive at that. If they wanted to extend it across the board, they would have said, if they wanted to make the oaths deeply entrenched across the board, they'd have entrenched Schedule 3.
Schedule 2.
Schedule 3.
Arguing is that it's an entrenchment by implication or by inference.
No, I'm not arguing that.
No.
I'm saying that.
Okay.
I'm saying that one can argue, it is arguable that the wording in Schedule 3 is incorporated in 83 and 35.
The language being unless the context otherwise requires.
But that's a determination that has to be made, whether the context otherwise requires. Because you can read, if you consider in terms of a drafting technique, if you consider that really that what the word oath in 83 does is to incorporate the words from Schedule 3. Yeah? And you read Section 83, this long form. It will be saying that before the supervisor of election enters on this office, he's to take the oath of allegiance to wit, and then you read out Schedule 3. So I'm saying that the word is incorporated there, at least that is arguable. But that's my first point. This is not straightforward. The second point is this, and I take the point that Robert made in terms of the absurdity. I take the point. But all I'm saying is that that is one of the birth defects. That is one of the issues with the Constitution that was handed down to us 50 years ago. It's a birth defect, and there are others. Let me just point out one before I come to the name there. For example, Section 105, deeply entrenched section.
Mm-hmm.
It says, Section 105.
I'm sorry, hold on, let me pull it up here.
In this chapter, reference to this Constitution shall be construed as including references in the court's order. And then it goes on. right? And it says, the court shall be styled, the Supreme Court established by the court, it says, the Supreme Court established by the court's order shall be styled the Supreme Court of Grenada and the West Indies Associated States. That's a deeply entrenched section. Yeah? So it means that, as was recognized in one of the earlier referenda, it means that to change the name of the court from West Indies Associated States Supreme Court to something else, you require a referendum. Isn't that an absurdity? And I say, even it is an absurdity, A. I could understand to change the structure of the court, to change the personnel of the court, to change the protection of the court, require a referendum. I could understand that. But this constitution had been done to us, is telling us that in order to change the name of the court, you have to go through a referendum. More than that, I will point out to you that while in High Court matters in Grenada, this is adhered to. You look at the heading applied for matters from the Court of Appeal. It says the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court. Nobody takes any issue with that.
Well,
so
Let's stick with the oath.
Jerry, because I think it's important because we're dealing with absurdities here.
No. Let's not go over it. Let's not go over it. Let's just
But it's important to make the point that that it's not only about the name, right? But we no longer have associated states.
exactly.
Right, so that even makes it more absurd, and we had to go to a referendum to put that E for Petit Martinique.
Yeah.
That people, would see that as absurd. I think in this case, though, a court can correct the absurdity in that we have a situation where if you have the head of state and the prime minister, the head of government, taking certain oaths. You can have other offices taking oaths that are different
why should
in an independent country.
So let me take the question. Jeremy, let's take the question. David is asking, how is Grenada defined in the new proposal? When we swear to Grenada, exactly what are we swearing to?
Grenada would be the state of Grenada.
Grenada incorporates the
so it incorporates parts of Grenada and the two main islands, Carriacou and Petit Martinique. It refers to the state of Grenada. Grenada there means the state of Grenada, and not the island of Grenada.
Correct.
So and there's no new definition of Grenada. The definition remains the same. One is not redefining it. It's just one is pledging allegiance to it. And I don't for one moment think that is a straightforward point. What these things do, and it's important that they be brought to the fore, because there are no easy answers to it. The need for reform of our constitution, that's what is the bottom line here. The longer we wait, and the more time that passes, and the more events that overtake us, then we'll find ourselves operating with our constitution that our history has long left us behind. And that's why, Jerry, I was making the point of associated states. If our court is named Grenada, the Supreme Court of Grenada and the West Indies Associated States, and that is contained in a deeply entrenched section of our constitution that requires a referendum in the context of Grenada there being no associated states. The last associated state gained independence in 1981. I think Antigua was the last.
Antigua,
But because we had St. Lucia, we had Dominica, St. Vincent. I believe Antigua.
Wasn't St. Christopher? Think it, yeah.
Yeah, I have St. Christopher, yes. I think St. Christopher and Nevis. I think St. Kitts was 83. But so could you imagine which associated states you're referring to? So that's gone more than 40 years ago.
But where we are now is to assist our parliament, as you rightly say, in the next 11, 12 days or so, with what we can do now to establish a bright line of what our oath of allegiance should be. And so we should look at how we're forward thinking people, I know that those of us who are here now, that we should observe a couple of things. That there is not one Caribbean constitution that requires a referendum to change its oath. First point, yes? There isn't one. That Grenada has not.
You sure about that?
Positive.
Okay.
Positive. That there is not one that we agree here that the oath of allegiance is not in itself, as set out in the schedule 1, is not deeply entrenched. We'd agree with that. That's a baseline agreement at the top.
Schedule 1 is not deeply entrenched.
Right, we agree with it.
Schedule 3.
Yeah, not Schedule 3.
Schedule 3 is not deeply entrenched.
Right, I'm sorry, yes. Schedule 3 is not deeply entrenched. We then look at precedent. What other what I call at the top, a systems approach. That is Westminster system, similar constitutions, democratic states. We know, without even looking at these constitutions, even though we've never read them, we know what the belly of a democratic constitution is. The right to vote, the right to liberty, the right to life, due process, the courts, and so on, right? We know those are deeply entrenched provisions. So when we look at the oath in the Bahamas, St. Vincent, St. Lucia, they leave that oath to be prescribed by law.
But Jerry, our constitution didn't do that. The constitution from 1973, the constitutional order to which our constitution is
I thought we agreed it's not a deeply entrenched provision.
No, you said that
the section. Sorry.
You go ahead.
Sorry, Jerry, there's a distinction between and that's where words are critical. What Schedule 3 is not deeply entrenched.
Unless the contact otherwise required.
Sorry?
Unless the context otherwise required.
No, the context otherwise requires is part of section 111.
Yes, section 111, yes.
Yeah.
That interpretation clause.
Yeah.
Right. So Schedule 3 is
in other words, how can we assist our parliamentarians? Let's be practical. How can we assist the members of parliament in deciding that an oath to Grenada, how can they achieve this? How can we achieve this? Yes, how can Grenada know 50 years since Hence, how can our parliamentarians take an oath? What can we point them to? Do we want to point them to the arcane structures in the Constitution that may, not shall, may lead to an absurdity? Or can we say that there are similar documents, constitutions, that says how we should treat with an oath? How should we treat with an oath? It seems to me that all the other constitutions are saying, cabinet can pass a law, parliament can pass a law. It's to be treated as though it's an SRO.
No, but our constitution does say that, Jerry, at a minimum.
No, it doesn't. Our constitution does not say that.
But no, at a minimum, I think on that. At a minimum, our constitution requires 2/3 of the majority in parliament.
In fact, I think at a minimum, that's right, it's parliament. So that the upper house, for example, can probably delay the process. So that's 2/3 in the lower house, a supermajority in the upper house. Yes, I think that's what we want.
You don't need no supermajority in the upper house.
You don't need it.
Majority.
A simple majority in the upper house, a simple majority in the lower house.
Only in the House of Representatives.
I'm sorry, yes, yes.
But one thing to look at it, Jerry, and that's why programs just engaging and people expressing views and looking from different perspectives. Because, as I said, on the face of it, the what we have is a situation where, on the face of it, I would call it the Alexis proposal is a proposal that I think we all wish to go that road. We all wish to walk that road. There's no question about that. So there's no debate or difference as far as that. There may be some who are, well, maybe opposed to it, but I can't see, do I say all these things guardedly after going through 2 referenda? Do I have to say these things guardedly? But, however, the lane formulation and interpretation, I think on the face of it, it reflects what our Constitution uniquely says. I just want to add a third feature to those 2 positions, which I agree with the aspirational aspect of what Dr. Alexis advocates. 1, 2, I recognize the unique difference with our Constitution and some of the other constitutions that may not lead to a straightforward destination by simply saying Schedule 1 does not Schedule 1 does not require or recognize Schedule 3 as a schedule that requires for changing a referendum of our people. So put simply, if you look at Schedule 1, what in effect is saying, if you're making changes to Schedule 3, a referendum is not required. However, when you go to Sections 35 and 83, which are deeply entrenched sections, these sections says you must take the oath of allegiance before taking office. And when you go to Section 111, 111 defines the oath of allegiance, which says the oath of allegiance is the oath of allegiance contained in Schedule 3 of the Constitution. how do you then extrapolate the oath of allegiance from the remainder of the section? And this is what I'm saying. That, listen, it will produce an absurdity to say the head of state, who is the representative of the king, can swear allegiance to Grenada, and I probably could leave it at that, and no other office has to swear to the king. 1. 2, Grenada is an independent sovereign state. We are celebrating now 50 years of independence. And therefore, going along those lines, and we can make other points, recognizing that if you interpret strictly Section 35 to say that oath of allegiance mean an oath of allegiance only to the king, that will lead to an absurdity. And in those circumstances, because we're not interpreting a regular act of parliament, we're interpreting a provision of the Constitution, and provisions of the Constitution attract broad and generous interpretation to give effect to it. So I'm saying, in other words, not necessarily the Alexis position or the Lane position. I'm looking at both of these positions and suggesting that if we do a strict interpretation of 35 and 83 and say that those will lead to retaining the oath of allegiance to Her Majesty, then we can simply say that an absurdity was never intended, and it could never be the intention of the framers of the Constitution to have in a single independent country the possibility of two sets of oaths, one being taken by certain persons and others being taken otherwise. And then I suppose it can be said, listen, the purpose of the Office of Supervisor of Elections is to ensure that people who can vote get the opportunity to vote, and that on election day voting goes smoothly. And the oath is procedural. In other words, the substantive position of the Office of Supervisor of Elections is to protect the democratic process, using her office as an independent office to ensure that. Now, before he or she takes up that office, you must take an oath. And therefore, that is a procedural thing that Parliament, those circumstances, can define the oath. Similarly, a similar argument goes for the members of the public service.
Right. Broad and generous.
Yes.
Broad and generous interpretation.
Let me get a response from Dave then. Here in the chat. He says, the oath of allegiance is taken to recognize loyalty to an ally. In the Grenada context, the ally is identified and is entrenched under Section 57, that the executive authority is vested in His Majesty. Every member of the executive is required to swear to the monarch before he takes his office. Changing the oaths does not change the monarch, and loyalty to the monarch is entrenched. Only a referendum can change these provisions.
I prefer to go with a constitutional scholar. Yes, I prefer to take the view of a constitutional scholar. And the layperson must be educated by the constitutionals. I will listen to the KC before I listen to the first year law student.
Well, should take that position, Jerry.
Why not?
I don't
Why
think
not?
because you see, the members of the public offer a unique perspective sometimes that we don't see. I just want to make a correction there because interestingly, section 57,
Of our
which is the
constitution?
section that David's referring to,
Yes.
indeed says that the executive authority lies in Her Majesty. But that is not one of the sections that
Right.
is subject to 39(5), according to the same schedule 1 of the Constitution.
Right.
It's not one of those sections that is deeply entrenched. But nevertheless, Jerry, you see, it goes to the point: to whom are we loyal?
We are
The
loyal.
reality is we are a constitutional monarchy. The part of our reality is that we exist in a constitutional monarchy. Dominica, for example, when Dominica gained independence in 1979, Dominica moved straight to a Republican state. In other words, they did one thing. So independence granted in 1979, they appointed their local president in 1979. So Dominica, for example, does not need to have the debate about whether we should move to a Republican state. Trinidad got independence in 1962. And 14 years later, moved to a 1976 Republican Constitution. So the question, and that is why I believe, and we have had this debate, and I think that is what triggered the format of the first constitutional referendum. Should we do this piecemeal? In other words, is it just sufficient for now to change the oath?
I will argue yes. I will argue yes. Unequivocally, yes. Yes.
Or should we move straight to what the oath is related to, which is our own establishing a republic, which is the debate in Jamaica, that whether or not
Sorry.
Jamaica should move to be a republic. What the opposition is saying there is that, listen, we're not supporting unless you put CCJ on the table, because we'll be a republic and still going to the Privy Council in London as our final court of appeal. So you see, there's a lot of issues, and I think when these issues arise, they give us the opportunity to, as some people will say, interrogate the Constitution, to look at it from different perspectives. And I'm quite happy that there was actually a contrary position advanced to Dr. Alexis's position, because it allows us to look at the issue more closely. And in looking at it more closely, I think we will be able to bring our people to a position that where we can even move more quickly on some other issues. But it's a question of people, getting to understand the Constitution and the value of these changes.
What essentially?
But I know time is again. But my view is something that needs to be discussed. It needs to be discussed. Whether or not it happens for February the 7th, it should be kept live on the table. If certain things can happen for February the 7th, and I'm certainly wary if in the context of debate, if there's uncertainty, then going forward with it in a divided way. But I think 2024, most of 2024, the anniversary of the 50th anniversary will be celebrated. And if it's not done on the 50th anniversary, we can do it at the 50th year of independence. That is also an alternative.
I think we have not, I think that Parliament, if members of Parliament, if the Attorney General is listening to us, they are just as confused as the public. They are saying that they would come to the conclusion that the Grenada Constitution is something outside of the Westminster system, that it is a constitution that has, where it concerns the oath of allegiance. We are unlike any other Westminster constitution, Bahamas, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, even Trinidad and Guyana. There is something about our constitution that makes it, when it comes to the oath, so unique and outside these other Westminster constitutions. And I don't think that's something that we should that's not the road we should take. I think we should see that we've come out of a common, we've come out of a common history, a common relationship to the United Kingdom, and where these other constitutions speak to the oath as having to do with any instrument. Our oath should be any instrument having the force of law.
Jerry, you're talking in 1974. You're talking in 1973. We are in 2024. What you're actually saying is what it should be. But
no, I'm saying what
with the reality of what is.
No,
not
no. What is the case?
Right, but if you recognize that it is unique when comparing constitutions, then you recognize there's a difference with it, and therefore,
no, I don't think it's unique. But you see, that's the difference.
Address that difference in moving forward.
It is not unique. No, it is not unique. An oath of allegiance.
Oh, I thought that is what you said. Sorry.
No.
Okay, let me just say two things without we need to end just now. Dave Dennis pointed out that section 57 of the Constitution is a deeply entrenched provision. It's contained in Schedule 1 of the Constitution. That's the first point. Secondly, Jerry, in terms of the input of the public, I think Dr. Alexis is on record as saying that it was questioning from a member of the public, as he put it. He was grilled by a member of the public. And that is what led him to, as he said, gave him the inspiration that, in fact, we can't go that route of amending the oath by amending Schedule 3, which does not require the support of a referendum. Because if you remember, in the first referendum held several years ago, amending the oath of allegiance was actually one of the topics, one of the items, one of the questions put to the public. So what we are seeing is evolving thinking on this issue, and the fact is that members of the public, lay people as we refer to them, are playing a critical issue by asking questions.
I don't think there's any member of the public. Let's put the public now in
yes.
as the
yes, and section
they are
entrenched.
Yes,
they are the stakeholders. We, the public, let's take off our lawyers' hat. We, the public, are the true stakeholders. Grenada is nothing without the people. The Constitution seeks to regulate the relationship between the state and the people. How can the Constitution be in our service? I think that's it. How can we make the Constitution work for us? And
yes, but part of the reality which we must remember is that the Constitution that we have was a document negotiated in 1973. And when I say negotiated, discussed and worked out. And it was then finalized by English draftsmen and then essentially handed down to us. That's the reality. And that's my point, essentially, because my focus, if you realize from the earlier piece tonight, was not really on the oath. The issue of the oath came up, and Nigeria thinking that this constitution is, well, there are several absurdities with this constitution, right? And that it's not modern. We need to really move forward as a people, as the Prime Minister and others say, we need to define how we want to be governed over the next 50 years. So the issue of really reforming the constitution, I think, is very, very topical, very important. We have some difficulties, and I don't think we should stifle any discussion with regard to them. I mean, people come up with creative ideas, and people come up with ideas that appear even nonsensical, but we need to take them on board and drill down on it. Martin Straught is absent. Good evening to the panel. The term used, not deeply entrenched, can this be interpreted as not binding? In this context, does this allow for Dr. Alexis' proposal to be implemented? That's just a question to the panel. I don't know if Rox, you can answer before we just wind up. Get your comment, Jerry comment, and then we end for it.
Yes, well, I think maybe the simplest way to answer, one, the Constitution is the supreme law. So it's the Constitution that creates Parliament and mandates what the function of Parliament is. And Parliament is the body that creates laws for the peace, order, and good government of the country. So you generally have, within the constitutional framework, you have what is called entrenched provision and deeply entrenched provisions. The deeply entrenched provisions are the provisions that require change by referendum. In other words, if you have to change a deeply entrenched provision of the Constitution, you must get, first of all, a special majority, 2/3 of all the members of the House of Representatives, the lower house, and 2/3 amongst the 10. And if you contrast that with an ordinary law, for example, it's just by simple majority. You can get an ordinary law passed in Parliament by way of simple majority of those present and voting. With a constitutional change, it is 2/3 of all the members. So if it's not 2/3 of who present, but it's 2/3 of 15, which is the total membership of the House of Representatives. And then now you must go to a referendum to get approval by a 2/3 majority. So that is where, that is what you call a deeply entrenched provision. For a provision that is not deeply entrenched, then what you have is a special majority in Parliament, which is the 2/3 majority. And you don't require a referendum for that. So linking that to the Dr. Alexis proposal, if Dr. Alexis is right, and notwithstanding the deeply entrenched provisions of 35 and 83 that relate to the Supervisor of Elections and the Public Service Commission, if he is right, then you only need 2/3 majority to change the oath across the board. If he is not right, and the lane formula is the right formula, then it means you can only change the oath of allegiance in relation to certain offices, including the Governor General, the Prime Minister, and parliamentarians. But you can't do it for Section 35 and 83. And if I am right, that it's just would lead to an absurdity, and we can't have a situation where we're having two different oaths, then through that route, it can be changed, notwithstanding the provision in section 35, because that's where now you deal with context. Context of the oath and everything and the absurdity it would lead to. But then the other position, which is another lean position, is in relation to, as I understand it, because the Supreme Law Clause is not an entrenched provision, then using the Supreme Law Clause, you can remove the deeply entrenched provisions from certain offices. But that one, while it is technically possible to take that approach, it is one that we have to be extremely guarded with in terms of the history of those provisions. It means that you are actually will be taking away what is seen or maybe perceived as the power of the public to cast a vote in relation to certain things. I'm saying it can have political repercussions.
I think
it might be
you have
legally
opened
sound.
the portal. I think you have opened the portal now to help our parliamentarians. The Supreme Law Clause. I think you have. I remember, Ruggs, when I came here and I was trying to help some dentists back in 2012 to get some things off the port. And someone said to me, you have all this stuff on the port, and I know you're only here for 2 weeks, but that's not the way we do things in Grenada. Right? And my view was, I have 2 weeks to be here. I have over $100,000 worth of dental equipment. And then these dentists have to treat these people and then leave. The way we do things here in Grenada is to go through a process that would take about 3 weeks to clear the goods off the port. Let's be practical. Let's be practical. How can we, I think that's really how we should approach this. How can we assist our parliamentarians so that 50 years on, the oath that is taken by Prime Minister, MPs, Supervisor of Elections, Governor General, how can we assist our parliamentarians to do what every other constitution in the Westminster system does with respect to oaths of allegiance? I think that's the roadmap we want to give them. And what the president says is that it could be as simple as an act of parliament, or to be safer, to use Ruggles' terms, we go to the parliament, not a referendum.
Okay, so let me just, before we end, Sheriff Kelly asks, can we then change the constitution from that which we know of? I guess that's a discussion that we could have in the future. So let me just end by saying what
we tried to change it twice already.
Right.
Yeah.
So what Robbins
changed twice already,
yes.
unsuccessfully. So the question is, how do you? In other words, we have a more uphill task to change our constitution than most other countries do. Had we not had the requirement of a referendum, we'd have been the CCJ a long time ago, probably together with Barbados and Guyana. Back in 2005. But the reality is, there are these issues, and that is why people's empowerment, people education, information about the Constitution is so important, because the reality is people have not internalized the Constitution and its value. And it's only when something happens, then, people raise certain things. So, for example, our countries, which is a discussion, a separate discussion, our countries, Grenada included, we have certain obligations, obligations under UN provisions and so on. I'm talking here specifically about the 2020 goals, 2020, 2035, eradicating poverty and all these things.
The UN goals.
And that help. Right, UN sustainable goals. There's no public, and I'm always amazed with it. There's no public discussion about it. But the world is trying to eradicate poverty. We move into climate change. We move into renewable energy. And there is nothing that reflects those discussions at all, right? At all, certainly at this level. But it's important. And our constitution is important, is an important tool in all of these discussions.
The yearning,
but I think I'm branching up.
Yes.
Where
Yes,
where
yearning
up in this program?
Right. So,
Sorry,
But Brother Lane, the yearning in the hearts and soul of every Grenadian is to pledge allegiance to Grenada. That is the yearning. And our people want to know how we can achieve this. Remember, God tried 7 times to get a perfect earth. 7 times, and on the 7th day, he finally got it. Yeah? God tried. So the fact that we tried to do our constitution twice, yeah, we'll get it eventually. It might take, I don't think it might take 7 tries. But
okay.
let's try. But the yearning, I don't think you will find a single Grenadian who says that we have to maintain an oath to
what I can say, I have referred this question. I have referred this question to the 3 people I believe, apart from Dr. Alexis, are the 3 foremost constitutional experts in the region. And they for a view on it, and especially looking at it from outside. I in fact, one called me just before this program and gave a view that I consider, but I wouldn't really go into it now, or to say it publicly, but it was an interesting view nevertheless there, and I expect to hear from the other 2 by tomorrow morning. And but I think when we do these things, and that's why consultation is important, and consultation, some engagement and discussions to see how other people really view it. Because if we don't have the power to change our oath of allegiance in the face of using the current oath for the last 50 years, and it can be argued that if you go referendum with it, that it will get a 2/3 majority. Though I could never be sure about that, Jerry.
Right.
Well, no, I mean, I would say that it's virtually impossible to get a 2/3 from a referendum. I think in any society, I mean, I think that was the noose that the British put around our necks when they gave us, Brother Lane, this constitution in 1973. But the yearning, I want to repeat this ad nauseum. There is not a single Grenadian, not one, that would say we should continue. And I think what Dr. Alexis is saying, let's look around and see what the other constitutions have said about this oath of allegiance. Let's see how can we do this in Grenada when everybody wants it. I think we can always find problem
The
in
time is running out on us. I think we need to end. So let me just say two things that may be important. Number one, what Rouse calls the Lane formula is not intended to say that we should continue with the oath. I share the aspiration for us to get rid of that oath. In fact, as soon as yesterday, I'm part of that aspiration. That's point number one.
Yeah, I should say interpretation and formula. Maybe interpretation is the proper word.
Secondly, my arguments, putting those arguments is really to highlight some of the absurdities that you correctly pointed out in our constitution, because there are absurdities. I pointed to the next one in 105. They need a referendum to change from associated states to Eastern Caribbean states, even though there's no longer any associated states. Right on its face, you need a referendum to do that. And there are other absurdities. Thirdly,
are we helping?
Thirdly,
How are we helping our people?
thirdly,
How
my view about Section 106 is not intended to take away the consent of the people. In fact, my position is a developed position. I first started to develop that position in 2015, 2017, prior to the second referendum. Because my argument, and I could develop it in the future regarding Section 106, is that what it will allow us to do is to remove that noose of the 2/3 majority from our midst. However, politically, jurisprudentially, constitutionally, and otherwise, my recommendation on any of these issues will be that we put these matters to the public with a law stipulated that the support of 50% plus one is what we need.
no majority?
Exactly. A simple
Simple
majority.
majority.
Britain removed itself from the EU by a referendum,
That's right.
50% plus
Correct.
one. So that is where my position is, that the people should be involved in it. And that's why I don't think we should just take the oath and you take this one and you take that one. I believe, and I will advocate over the coming months, years, we examine that, whether Section 106 does not allow us to write a constitutional text coming out of the bowels of Grenadians, to put that constitutional text to the people. If you get the people to approve it by a simple majority, then it becomes the constitutional text of the Grenadian people, the supremacy of it protected by that simple majority. So I am not at all recommending that any of these things just be done by a simple voting ballot. I'm saying the non-entrenchment, referendum entrenchment of 106 offers possibilities that should be taken up so that we could have a democratic constitution coming out of the bowels of the people. Other people call it repatriated the constitution. We draft a constitution and remove all these absurdities that we know of. So that is my position. It's not simple as well, we just do this and we do that.
Right. I think clearly that is your last word on it. I think that Dr. Alexis has a practical way for us to achieve this, understanding that the will of the people is to have an oath to Grenada, the will of everyone on both political, even on the political sides, in every aspect of our lives here in Grenada. Everyone would agree that our oath, and when you have that kind of consensus, I think we should act. I think we should act.
Okay.
I think we should act.
All right, thank you very much. I think the first program was quite useful. I hope that it will be followed by more people and we can continue this
Yes.
discussion and debate.
Very interesting, very interesting.
Also, I just want to say it was the Caribbean people demonstrated what we have made of in the last 24 hours. For those who follow cricket, they will get me.
All right.
Thank you. Okay, back.
Thank you very much. Good night, Casey. Good to see you. And good night.
Next week.
Good night.
See everyone next week.
Good night, Brother Lane. And good night to the audience.
Good night.
Good night to the audience.
Good night. Yeah.
Thank
Good evening. What is your name?
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to Gem FM real live broadcast of the. Oh no, I moved this out. Let me make some adjustments here. I find my mouse is okay. Gotta move it out and then stop this. And yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hold the position here still that we need to remove the oath, swear the oath of allegiance to the Queen and her successors and nonsense. I think we should back away from that. And so, based on the discussion that we have heard here tonight, with Comrade Lane, Comrade Ruggles, and Mr. Jerry, attorney at law, I think it is fitting that at 2/3 majority of the 15 seats in the parliament, the 2/3, yes, we could. I think we don't need a referendum. It's my belief we don't need. I agree with Francis Alex in that. For that purpose, for this time, for the 50th anniversary, we should remove that oath of allegiance, yes, to them. But the bigger picture, and I think the biggest thing to do is to literally have a constitution, a total removal of the one. Let the one stay still until we rewrite our own from our people, as the revolution was about to do pre-invasion. As the Constitutional Commission already set up, headed by Mr. I can't remember the brother name right now, but he came in from Trinidad just October of '83 to help us to formulate our constitution for a young revolution. And that requires us to now, even this time, to continue the struggle to remove the Queen's constitution that was imposed or given to us for the purpose of independence. Now we have a choice. We are an independent nation in the terms of independence, of the legality of it, of being not dependent on the monarchy as a supreme oversight of us as a people. That's what independence of Britain was, from us not being run or controlled by them. Not economic independence. We never had, no country would ever have that. What we need is total removal of the constitution that they gave us. Because all the things that in the constitution does not reflect who we are as a people. And that's my struggle with that. We need to remove that. So at this end, I would support, like in the closing statement, I would support the removal and replacing and making over, bring to the people and let them decide from the boards of our people, our constitution, and not just let the people decide that for us in parliament, but let the people we make a draft, submit to the people, what they want to see in it, what they don't want to see in it, and then we bring it to the vote, and we get it passed, and that's how we do it. This nitpicking, pulling apart piece in the constitution, allowing people to put a piece what they want for themselves in it, does not cut it for me. You know, mixing up little matters inside the part of the constitution that they did in the last two attempts. It really was not a genuine effort to fix the constitution, in my view. So all the little intricacies and things they had in it, it failed. It failed. And the government did a very poor job of trying to push those agendas inside the constitution so people could fall victim of it. And it didn't work. And that's the reason why it didn't work. But now you need to a total remake of and replacement of the old with a new one. That one not coming from England, coming from Grenadian people. And I think that's the way we have to go with this. Change it around. All right, Sarah, at 8:30, I'll be starting because of time. I'll be starting the Afrobeat program in half an hour time. All right. God bless you guys. Have a wonderful evening. One love, one heart, one destiny. May God bless you and keep you in everything we do. Have a blessed night. All right. Bless up. Find me a song and I will give you a vibes. All right. Here you go. African Teller. Love it.
Footsteps of the King. Our world is simple than thinking of DJ Soulaholic. No, no. Parties and the mad soca DJ from all out. I was young, stupid, I was see. I went and married to Fox Jenny. And every time I have been problem with she. Baby, girl, I can take the pressure no more. I'm sorry I have to leave you and go. Baby, girl, I can take the pressure no more. I'm sorry I have to leave you and go. I do, baby, it's true. I love you, but baby, it's true.
I can see you and me. I can see you have everything that everyone can. Everything in everything that's not there. Oh, baby, it's true. I love you. Oh, honey, I do.
All of it, I feel it was the right job. Make it come, meant to love you forever. Don't use your statement, I tell you would never. That up inside that girl you make cover. No woman in my life can't talk out my paper. I know somebody that died, that be the best lover. Only if you would have saying I'm a life man, that girl. You would have to be telling you very well.
I must not be with you. I will company.
I did very
But
first
she
of
was not lining with Barani. No longer you show your respect to me. Baby, girl, I can't take the pressure no more. I'm sorry I have to leave you and go. Baby, girl, I can't take the pressure no more. I'm sorry I have to leave you and go. True, baby, it's true. I love you, but baby, it's true. Good daddy.